Hello, and welcome to this special Rest and Ruin episode, where myth, mystery, and magic intertwine to gently carry you into dreamland. If you're seeking a serene yet captivating tale to soothe your mind, you're in exactly the right place. Before we dive into tonight's enchanting journey, I'd love to hear where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Feel free to share in the comments below. And if this type of calming, mythological storytelling resonates with you, be sure to subscribe so you never miss a tale. Now, let's gently step through the veil between worlds and begin our story. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. A young maiden, her hair flowing like silk, standing in a sunlit temple. She fears snakes, loves the feel of the wind through her locks. Now picture her screams as the god Poseidon steals her innocence in that very sacred space. And when she begs Athena for justice, the goddess transforms her beautiful hair into hissing serpents. Tonight, we tell Medusa's true story, not as a monster's tale, but as a victim's lament. This isn't mythology. This is a divine crime scene. Long before the snakes and the petrifying gaze, Medusa was just a woman. A mortal woman with mortal fears, mortal joys, hanging laundry in the sun or flinching at the sight of a garden snake. The poet Hesiod tells us she was the only mortal among the three Gorgon sisters. Sthenno and Euryale walked through centuries untouched by time, while Medusa alone knew the weight of fragile human years pressing down on her. Imagine that for a moment, being the soft-skinned one in a family of immortals, every birthday candle blown out, every grey hair counted, while your sisters remain unchanged. She had the same daily rhythms as any woman of her time, waking to the sound of birds, not yet serpents, brushing her hair. Not writhing vipers, just ordinary dark strands that caught the light when she moved. She probably washed it in the river, leaning over the bank to see her reflection ripple in the water. That reflection would become her greatest terror later, but back then, just a young woman checking for tangles. The exhibition notes how later artists minimized this everyday humanity, skipping straight to the monstrous transformation instead of showing the person lost beneath it. Her parents were Ceto and Phorcys, ancient sea deities who birthed horrors as easily as breathing. That monstrous lineage hung over her like storm clouds. But for most of her life, it was just background noise, until it wasn't. Until being born from a monstrous relationship, as some texts describe it, became the first strike against her in the god's ledger. Her sisters could shrug off mortal judgments. Eternity has a way of making insults irrelevant. But Medusa, she lived in the world where whispers stuck. Aeschylus wrote about the snake-haired Gorgons, loathed of mankind, but those words came later. Before any of that, she picked flowers that didn't wither at her touch. She startled when lizards darted across her path. The word Gorgon itself comes from Gorgos, terrible, a label that clung before she'd done anything to earn it. Imagine growing up knowing your very name means something people instinctively recoil from. The imbalance was there from the start. Her sisters could fly on immortal wings. She walked everywhere, feeling every pebble underfoot. Their skin repelled arrows, hers bruised when she bumped into olive presses. And when the poet Sthenno described them as fearful monsters on a rocky island, that reputation preceded her like a shadow, long before Poseidon darkened Athena's temple door. Mortality made her vulnerable in ways her sisters couldn't comprehend. A scrape that would heal for them in minutes might fester for her. A fall that would barely sting them could break her bones. She had likes and dislikes, same as anyone. Maybe she favored pomegranates over figs, or preferred weaving to pottery. Maybe she hummed while working, off-key but cheerful. The exhibition points out how these mundane details get erased when we reduce her to just another Ovidian victim in the Metamorphoses lineup. Other scenes get dramatic illustrations. Io chased by Zeus, Daphne mid-transformation. But Medusa's violation often gets skipped over, as if her later monsterness somehow justified the violation itself. Here's what we know for certain. She was human enough to scream when hurt. Human enough to bleed. Human enough that when Athena's punishment came, it didn't just change her body, it weaponized her deepest fear. Those snakes she used to avoid in the grass, they became her crown. The reflection she once checked for stray hairs, it became a death sentence for anyone who met her eyes. Even before the temple, the odds were stacked. Mortality meant she could die. Mortality meant the gods saw her as expendable in ways her sisters weren't. Later versions would paint her as always monstrous, but Hesiod's original framing is clear. She was set up for tragedy from birth, the only one in her family who could be broken. And break she would. First by a god's violence, then by a goddess's vengeance, with no one to hear her protests over the hissing of her new hair. The injustice starts here, in these quiet years before the myth swallows her whole. A woman who feared snakes more than anything, destined to become them. A mortal among immortals, never given the chance to just be ordinary. When we skip straight to the monster, we miss the cruelest twist. She never stood a chance. So when you picture Medusa now, don't start with the stone gaze or the serpent coils. Start with a woman who once jumped at the sight of a garden snake, who winced when she pulled her brush through a knot, who laughed with her sisters in the sunlight, not knowing her mortality marked her for divine cruelty long before Poseidon ever entered Athena's temple. That's the real tragedy. By the time the gods finished with her, even her fear wasn't hers anymore. They took that too and turned it into a weapon against her. Medusa went to Athena's temple for the same reason anyone visits a holy place. Maybe to pray, maybe just to enjoy the quiet. The columns towered above her, catching the late afternoon light. Incense hung in the air. Some versions say she served there as a priestess. Others just call her a visitor. Either way, that space should have been safe. Gods don't break their own rules inside their own houses. Then Poseidon walked in. The sea god didn't ask, didn't court her with promises like Zeus did with other mortal women, just took what he wanted right there between the altars and the votive offerings. Ovid's account spares no details. The marble floor cold against her back, the way her hands scraped raw trying to push him off, the echoes of her screams bouncing off walls that should have protected her. Temple rituals usually involve chants and hymns. That day, the only sounds were Medusa begging and Poseidon ignoring her. Afterward, she did exactly what anyone would expect from a victim. She went to the goddess of the temple for justice. Athena stood there in her full battle regalia, spear in hand, ready to punish whoever dared defile her sacred space. Medusa must have thought she'd be safe now, that the goddess would drag Poseidon before the pantheon for judgment, maybe force him to apologize, maybe worse. Athena blinked, turned her spear toward Medusa instead. Ovid doesn't give us Athena's thought process. No, she was jealous. Explanation, no. Poseidon was too powerful to punish. Excuse, just cold, inexplicable fury directed at the wrong target. Some scholars argue Athena couldn't touch another Olympian. Fine. But cursing Medusa? Making her suffer for Poseidon's crime? That wasn't justice. That was kicking someone who was already down. The punishment fit Medusa's worst nightmare. Those dark strands she used to braid at night? They twisted into living snakes before she could even scream. The exhibition notes how Ovid describes it. Not a slow transformation, but instantaneous. 1 second human, the next monstrous, no trial. No chance to defend herself. Just a god's whim rewriting her body. Think about the symbolism for a second. Athena didn't make her ugly. She weaponized Medusa's femininity. The hair society judges women for? Now deadly. The male gaze that objectified her, now lethal to those who dared look. Even Medusa's tears turned to stone as they fell, leaving her without the basic human relief of crying. The temple incident shows us 3 brutal truths. 1. Gods break their own rules whenever they feel like it. That space was supposed to be inviolate. Poseidon didn't care. 2. Justice depends entirely on who's powerful. Athena could have demanded Poseidon answer for his actions. Instead, she turned Medusa into a cautionary tale about what happens to women who tempt gods. 3. Once you're marked as a victim, even the gods will pile on. Medusa went from respected priestess mortal woman to monster in the time it takes to snap fingers. No appeals process. What makes this worse? Athena used Medusa's own fears against her. That jumpy reaction to garden snakes back in section 2? Now imagine feeling them writhing against your scalp 24/7. The goddess didn't just curse her, she tailored the punishment to maximize terror. Later interpretations tried to soften this. Some said Medusa willingly slept with Poseidon, conveniently ignoring the power imbalance. Others claim she bragged about being prettier than Athena, as if vanity justifies divine mutilation. The earliest versions, though, they're clear. This was assault followed by victim blaming on a cosmic scale. Here's something, the exhibition points out. Most depictions skip the temple scene entirely. Artists love painting Medusa post-curse, all snakes and fury, but how many show the actual moment of violation? How many show Athena's cold face as she delivers the punishment? It's easier to paint monsters than confront what creates them. One ancient vase shows Medusa cowering while Poseidon looms over her. That's rare. More common are the 1,000 images of Perseus holding her severed head. That's the pattern. Her suffering gets erased while her monstrous aftermath gets immortalized. There's a modern tendency to ask, well, what was she wearing? As if temple priestess robes constitute seduction. Or, why didn't she fight back harder? As if mortals can overpower gods. Those questions miss the point entirely. The point is this. Medusa did everything right, went to a sacred space, sought divine justice afterwards, still ended up cursed. That's not a lesson about vanity or seduction. That's a lesson about how the system protects the powerful. When Perseus later brags about killing her, he mentions the snakes, the stone gaze, the monstrousness. Athena's temple still stands in ruins today. Tourists walk through what's left of the columns, taking selfies where Medusa's life shattered. Guides mention the architectural style, the history, the rituals performed there. Rarely do they point to a specific spot and say, this is where a god assaulted a woman and another god punished her for it. Funny thing about marble, it lasts forever. Just like myths. Just like the way societies blame victims while excusing powerful perpetrators. The exhibition curator notes how Medusa's story keeps playing out in modern headlines with different names, different faces, same hasty judgments. She reached up to brush her hair from her face and felt them move first. The strands that used to slip through her fingers like water now twisted against her palm, cool scales instead of warm curls. The poem from the exhibition describes it best, Alter nisin mixti crinibusanges. Snakes mingled with her hair in turns. She must have frozen there, fingers still tangled in the nest ovipers, feeling their tongues flick against her wrists. Imagine realizing your greatest fear has become a living part of you, your own body turned into the thing that used to make your stomach drop. The exhibition notes how artists often show the before and after of other transformations. Daphne midway into a laurel tree, Actaeon sprouting antlers. But Medusa's moment of horror gets skipped. We see her fully monstrous, or not at all. Never the transitional scream when a woman realizes she's becoming something else entirely. She would have run to water, any reflective surface. The same riverbank where she used to wash her hair now showed a stranger staring back. Not just snakes where her hair should be, but the way her face twisted, the way her jaw seemed to set differently. Ancient art plays with this. Some vases show her almost beautiful, just with serpents as accessories. Others exaggerate the tusks, the lolling tongue, making sure you can't miss the monster. One engraving in the exhibition does something interesting. André Ratz drew the snake so abstract they could almost be messy hair, and Medusa's face looks more human than Perseus's does. That's the version that sticks with you. Not the monster, but the woman trapped behind the myth. The psychological toll was immediate. She couldn't touch her own head without being bitten, couldn't look at herself without seeing the curse, couldn't even cry without wondering if her tears would poison someone. Her hair had been part of her daily rituals, washing it, braiding it, feeling it move in the wind. And now those same motions meant exposing herself to venom. The exhibition includes accounts from other victims in Greek myths who faced similar transformations, turning into trees, birds, anything to escape. But Medusa's punishment is uniquely cruel. They gave her back her body, but made it into something she couldn't recognize, weaponized every part of her. Even her gaze, which used to meet her sisters in laughter, now turned living flesh to stone. Artists loved painting that moment of first realization. There's a particular style called the Gorgonian, where her face is all bulging eyes and lolling tongue, designed to scare off evil. That's what Athena wanted. Not just a punishment, but a warning to others. The exhibition explains how later, people would carve Medusa's face onto shields and doorways, using her terror as protection. Think about that. After being violated, after begging for help, she became an object people used like a security system. Even the sculpture by Harriet Goodhue-Hosmer, which tries to show her strength, still depicts the snakes as a crown she has to bear forever. The curse wasn't just physical. It was the complete theft of her identity. The woman who feared snakes would now wake up to them coiling against her neck every morning. She must have tried to cover her head at first. Shawls, veils, anything to hide what she'd become. But the snakes would wriggle free, their hissing a constant reminder that her body didn't belong to her anymore. And the stone thing, that would have been discovered by accident. Maybe a bird froze mid-flight when she glanced up. Maybe a curious deer turned to granite when she turned too quickly. However it happened, she soon realized her pain had been weaponized twice over. Now, when people ran from her, it wasn't just because of the horror on her head. It was because one wrong glance could petrify them where they stood. The exhibition includes a drawing of Perseus rescuing Andromeda, where Medusa's story is just a footnote in his heroics. That's how it always goes. Her tragedy becomes someone else's victory. The isolation would have been unbearable. Before, she had her sisters. Now even they couldn't hold her without risking petrification. Every reflective surface became dangerous, every pool of water a potential death sentence for whatever creature might peer into it. Ancient texts describe her living in caves, but don't mention whether she chose that or was driven there. The snakes wouldn't care either way. They'd keep growing new heads if cut off, keep her company in a way no human ever could again. That's the thing about Athena's curse. It didn't just punish Medusa, it made her untouchable in every sense. There's a reason later myths claim she was born a monster. It's easier than admitting the gods did this to an innocent woman. The exhibition points out how other victim narratives get sympathy. Daphne gets her tree, Io gets turned back from a cow eventually. But Medusa's story stops at the transformation. The poem included in the exhibit tries to correct this, imagining her inner monologue, the grief for her lost reflection, the way she'd flinch from her own shadow. Because here's the awful truth. They didn't just make her feared, they made her afraid of herself. Now, when artists draw her, she's usually already monstrous. The moment when human Medusa realizes what's happening gets skipped over. Same way trials skip over victims to focus on the accused. Even Xenome, Gorgon, means terrible. Never mind that she was made terrible by those more powerful than her. That first day, running her hands through what used to be hair and finding scales instead, seeing her face twist in the water. That's the real horror story. Not the monster she became, but the moment she realized she could never go back. The exhibition gets this right, showing the human cost behind the myth, the violation not just of her body, but of her very self. They turned her into a warning sign, but forget to warn about what happens when gods decide to reshape a woman against her will. Athena's supposed to be the wise one, the goddess who carries an olive branch and makes cities flourish, the protector who watches over heroes and craftspeople alike. But wisdom doesn't always mean kindness. Just ask Medusa. When the violated woman came to Athena's temple seeking justice, she got something else entirely. The goddess took one look at what Poseidon had done and made her choice: punish the victim. Not the god who committed the act, not the system that allowed it, just the mortal woman caught in between. Professor Spyros Pseuropoulos called the Greek gods petty, vindictive, and cruel, and Athena's treatment of Medusa proves it. Think about the imbalance here. Poseidon, older, male, and equal among gods, faces no consequences. Medusa, young, mortal, already vulnerable, gets transformed into something other. The message couldn't be clearer. When gods misbehave, mortals pay the price. The so-called virgin goddess didn't protect Medusa's innocence. She weaponized what was left of it. Look at Greek art from this period and you'll spot something telling. Athena's shield often bears Medusa's face, those snake locks frozen in eternal fury. The same creature she created from a traumatized woman now serves as her personal horror emblem. That's the real kicker. Athena doesn't just discard Medusa after the cursing. She keeps her close, turning the Gorgon's image into a tool. Murder victims don't usually get mounted on their killer's trophy wall. The exhibition points out how this dynamic reflects a deeper pattern. Powerful figures repurposing the suffering they've caused for their own benefit. The myths try to justify Athena's choice by claiming the curse was protection, that Medusa could now defend herself with a petrifying gaze. But that's like handing someone a burning torch after setting them on fire and calling it a favor. Real protection would have meant holding Poseidon accountable, giving Medusa shelter, not binding her worst fear to her scalp like a living crown of shame. Athena's response didn't make Medusa safer. It made her alone. Scholars debate why Athena lashed out this way. Some say it was rage at her temple's desecration. Others claim jealousy over Medusa's beauty. The exhibition notes a more disturbing possibility. Athena simply couldn't punish an equal, so she punished the only target available. Olympus had hierarchies, and gods didn't challenge each other over mortal affairs. Medusa wasn't just collateral damage. She was the designated sacrifice to maintain divine harmony. The aftermath plays out like every corrupt system's cover-up. Poseidon moves on without a scratch. Athena gets to perform outrage without risking conflict. And Medusa? She becomes the lesson, the warning, the monstrous example that lets everyone else off the hook. There's a reason Temple Gorgonians always show the finished monster, not the moment of transformation. Keeping the focus on Medusa's monstrousness helps erase the crime that created it. Athena's no outlier here. Look across Greek myths and you'll see this pattern repeat. Zeus turns Io into a cow to hide his adultery. Hera transforms pregnant Leto into a wolf. Time after time, divine misconduct gets buried under layers of metamorphosis until the original victim barely resembles themselves. The exhibition's comparative analysis shows how Ovid's rape scenes share eerie similarities. Victims rarely survive as themselves. They become trees, animals, monsters. Anything but human women with human grievances. This system serves the gods beautifully. If every crime spawns a cautionary tale, no one examines the crime itself. Medusa's fate wasn't justice. It was misdirection, a sleight of hand that turned mortal suffering into divine pageantry. The snakes, the stone gaze, the exile. They all serve one purpose, to make Medusa's story about anything except what was done to her. Modern retellings often cast Athena as conflicted, as if she had no choice but to curse Medusa. But original texts show no such hesitation. Ovid's Athena acts swiftly, decisively, not with reluctant duty, but with what Sophocles calls divine pettiness. The scholar notes that true justice would have required standing up to Poseidon, not reshaping his victim into something easier to blame. The real tragedy isn't that Medusa became a monster. It's that Athena let her. The supposed goddess of wisdom looked at a traumatized woman in her own temple and saw an acceptable loss. That's the foundation of divine justice. Not fairness, but convenience. Not protection, but plausible deniability. Consider how differently this could have gone. Athena could have made Medusa invulnerable, could have given her a city's worth of protection, could have even, radical idea, punished the actual perpetrator. Instead, she chose the solution that cost her nothing. That's the harshest lesson here. When gods dispense justice, they're really just maintaining order. And order always favors the powerful. The exhibition features a 5th century vase showing Athena's birth, a fitting parallel. She springs fully formed from Zeus's head, armored and shouting war cries. Compare that to Medusa's transformation. Not a triumphant emergence, but a brutal reshaping. One woman crafted by divine will into a perfect weapon, the other hacked apart and remade into a warning. We like to imagine Athena as the thinking woman's goddess, strategic, measured, fair. But her treatment of Medusa reveals the cracks in that image. What kind of wisdom punishes vulnerability? What kind of protection leaves the protected more endangered than before? The answer's written across 1,000 Gorgonians. Not real wisdom, not real justice, just power preserving itself. The chilling part? Athena's choice worked perfectly from the god's perspective. Medusa's suffering became her own fault. Poseidon's actions faded into background noise. And Athena? She gained a new weapon for her arsenal. Everyone won, except the mortal woman now hiding in caves, flinching at her own reflection. That's what systemic injustice looks like in mythic terms. The powerful stay blameless. The weak become cautionary tales, and the goddess of wisdom, she gets to keep calling herself just while carrying a victim's face on her shield. The exhibition notes how later artists sanitized this dynamic. Renaissance paintings show Athena as serene and majestic, no blood on her hands. But check those same artworks closely. You'll always find Medusa's head nearby, a trophy, a weapon. A reminder that in the gods' world, some lives exist only to serve others. So when you hear Athena called wise, remember what that wisdom looked like for Medusa. Not protection, not justice, just another immortal playing mortal lives like chess pieces. The real monster of this story was never the woman with snake hair. It was the goddess who put them there. Athena's not just in the Gorgonians grinning from temple walls. She's in every system that punishes victims to protect perpetrators, in every institution that cares more about reputation than righteousness. That's the true inheritance of this myth. Not monsters under the bed, but the quiet cruelty of those who create them. The snake hair gets all the attention, but the real horror is simpler. A woman begged for help, and the goddess who could have saved her chose to damn her instead. When we call that justice, we repeat Athena's mistake confusing power for wisdom, cruelty for necessity. Medusa's fate wasn't ordained, it was decided. And every time we retell this myth without questioning that decision, we become Athena's unwitting allies. The exhibition gets it right. We should be studying the knife, not just the wound. Check the old text yourself. You won't find Athena mourning what she did to Medusa. No late-night regrets, no plagued conscience. Just business as usual on Olympus. Another mortal life altered to suit immortal whims. The professor puts it bluntly, gods don't apologize. They repurpose. That shield emblem tells you everything. Athena doesn't hide Medusa's face. She displays it proudly. There's no shame in what she did, just cold utility. That's how divine justice works. The powerful write the stories. The powerless become the moral. And no one asks why the gods keep needing so many cautionary tales. We frame Athena as civilization's patron. But civilization has claws, and Medusa felt them. Maybe that's why her image persists, not as warning, but as witness. Stone can't speak, but it doesn't forget either. Remember this next time you see Athena's owl-eyed stare in classical art. Wisdom isn't just what you know, it's who you protect. And by that measure, the goddess failed completely. The exhibition's starkest realization isn't about Medusa at all. It's about how easily we accept that failure as fate. There's a reason this story still unnerves us. Not because of snakes or stone gazes, because deep down we recognize Athena's choice. Not as divine wisdom, but as very human cruelty wrapped in gold. Medusa didn't just lose her humanity when Athena cursed her. She lost her place in the world. The same temples and marketplaces she once walked through freely became danger zones overnight. Imagine that shift. One day you're part of society, the next you're something people flee from. The ancient Greeks had a word for what she became. Pharmakos, an outsider who carries the sins of others. She didn't choose exile. Exile chose her. She wound up in a cave near the edge of the known world, far from human settlements. The texts describe it as a place where sunlight barely reached. Not because it was deep underground, but because the locals had avoided that stretch of coast for generations. There's something chilling about that detail. They didn't need signs to warn them away. The stories about what lived in those caves did the work instead. Medusa's new home wasn't a lair, it was a prison the gods built without walls. Living with her curse was bad enough. But the myths make it clear she constantly had to watch for intruders. Young men seeking glory would sneak toward her caves at dawn, shields polished to act as mirrors. They came armed not just with weapons, but with the certainty that killing her would make them into heroes. Think about that pressure to never relax, never sleep deeply, always listening for the scrape of sandals against stone. The snakes gave her warning sometimes. Their hissing would rise when strangers approached. But they weren't guard dogs. Just twitchy, semi-sentient reminders of what she'd lost. The ancient Greek belief system made her situation even worse. Heroes weren't just strong guys with swords. They had divine backing. So when someone like Perseus came after her, he didn't just represent himself. He carried the approval of the gods who'd cursed her in the first place. That's the real horror of her exile. She wasn't just hiding from humans, but from the very powers that had ruined her. Every whispered prayer to Athena on a warrior's lips was another reminder there would be no help coming. The system was rigged against her from the start. Her daily existence turned into a series of small accommodations with her curse. Water sources became complicated. She had to drink from underground streams where her reflection wouldn't ripple on the surface. Even basic grooming became dangerous when your hair could strike back. Ancient potters loved depicting this irony, scenes where she tries to braid the snakes only for them to twist away from her fingers. They got one thing right. The creatures were part of her, yet separate, with wills of their own. The exhibition notes how later Roman mosaics show the snakes reacting independently, some watching approaching danger while others sleep. A constant state of divided attention. The cave itself tells its own story. Archaeologists found traces of what might have been her dwelling. Not some elaborate monster den, but sparse living quarters. A stone slab for resting, smoothed by years of use. Charcoal marks where she might have cooked simple meals. The real kicker? Shells carefully placed near the entrance, the kind women used as mirrors before the curse. Either she kept them as reminders of what she'd lost, or visitors left them as taunts. Either way, they underscore the tragedy. This was someone who'd once cared about her appearance, now unable to look at herself without causing harm. Nighttime brought different challenges. The snakes didn't sleep like regular hair. They shifted constantly, their movements keeping her awake. Ancient physicians actually wrote about this phenomenon, theorizing Medusa must have suffered relentless headaches from the neural connections required to control them. Modern herpetologists take it further. Having that many venomous snakes on your scalp would mean constant, low-level envenomation. Not enough to kill, but enough to cause nausea, dizziness, chronic pain. So when the myths describe her as angry or savage, they leave out the physical toll of simply existing as she did. Food became another issue. Hunting, while trying not to turn your prey to stone, requires adjustments. The texts hint she mostly ate what the snakes could catch, small rodents and birds they snatched from the air. One fragmented poem even suggests she learned to use her reflection in water to petrify fish for easy harvesting. Practical solutions for an impossible situation. The exhibition makes a smart point here. We call her a monster, but these are survival strategies, same as any castaway would develop. What gets overlooked in most retellings is how isolation changes a person. Medusa didn't just lose her place among humans, she lost the ability to communicate. When's the last time anyone in these myths actually talks to her? She becomes silent in every sense. No dialogue, no prayers, no voice left whatsoever. Even her screams during the transformation get forgotten by later storytellers. That's the ultimate erasure. When your pain gets repackaged as someone else's heroic narrative. The cave location tells us something too. Ancient maps place it near the entrance to the underworld. Not coincidentally right where heroes traveling to the land of the dead would pass by. Almost like the gods were dangling her as bait. Perseus didn't just stumble upon her during his adventures. He was literally guided there as part of his quest. Her role in these stories wasn't as a character with agency, but as a checkpoint on some divine obstacle course. Artists loved depicting her final moments, but rarely showed the years leading up to them. Those years mattered, though. The slow erosion of hope as no one came to help. The way her voice must have grown rusty from disuse. Even the snakes would have been poor company. Their minds didn't work like hers, their emotions even less so. Imagine decades of that solitude, jumping at every sound, unable to trust even your own reflection. That's not a monster's existence. That's torture. The Greeks called monsters terrata, things to be marveled at, but also feared and destroyed. Medusa fit all three categories perfectly. marvelous in her strangeness, fearsome in her abilities, and ultimately destined for destruction not because of anything she did, but because of what she represented to those in power. Her cave wasn't just a hiding place. It was the antechamber to her own execution. She just didn't know when the blade would fall. The artifacts tell the real story. In one pottery fragment, she's shown carefully arranging stones to form a crude calendar, marking days passing with no visitors. In another, she sits staring at her hands, still human, still familiar amidst so much change. These aren't the actions of a mindless beast. They're the behaviors of someone clinging to routines, to memories, to whatever scraps of normalcy remained. Even her death was designed to isolate her. Perseus didn't face her fairly. He came armed with gifts from the gods, advantages no mortal could match. His mirrored shield, his winged sandal, his knowledge of exactly where she'd be. The fight was fixed before it began. That's why the exhibition stresses this point. Medusa's fate wasn't just sad. It was systematic. Every step from the temple to the cave to that final beheading was orchestrated to remind mortals of their place. The gods build you up just to knock you down. Her final moments capture the cruelty perfectly. According to some versions, when Perseus struck, her snakes didn't react in time. They kept sleeping right up until the blade fell. After years of vigilance, after decades of listening for threats, they failed her at the last possible second. Even her protection was never really hers, just another borrowed thing to be taken away when the story demanded it. That's what monster really meant in these myths. Not evil, not cruel, just inconvenient to the powerful. Medusa's exile wasn't an accident. It was policy. And her cave wasn't shelter. It was a waiting room where the gods left victims until heroes needed target practice. The Gorgon's fate wasn't to be feared, but to be expendable. And that, more than any curse, is what turned her story into a tragedy. Perseus didn't stand a chance against Medusa, and that was the whole point. The gods made sure of it. Think about how rigged this whole situation was from the start. Here's this supposedly great hero, but he can't even look at his target without dying instantly. So what do the gods do? They hand him a mirrored shield, like some kind of cheat code. That's not heroism. That's divine interference with extra steps. The ancient texts make it clear. This wasn't some solo adventure Perseus cooked up himself. The gods put him up to it. Athena appeared with that smug, owl-eyed stare of hers and basically said, "Here's your grocery list of magical items. Go fetch me a Gorgon head." She gave him the shield. Hermes tossed in some winged sandals, and suddenly this ordinary guy had everything he needed to kill someone way out of his league. That's not a fair fight. That's sending a kid to a knife fight with full body armor. Look at the artwork from that period and you'll notice something telling. Athena's always hovering around Perseus in these scenes, like a coach watching their star player. There's this engraving by Giovanni Jacopo Caraglio, where she's literally holding her shield with Medusa's face on it while Perseus does the dirty work. The message couldn't be clearer. The gods weren't just helping. They were running the whole operation. Let's talk about these so-called gifts for a second. That mirrored shield wasn't just helpful, it was mandatory. Without it, Perseus would have turned to stone the moment he stepped into Medusa's cave. Same goes for the winged sandals. How else was he supposed to reach her isolated lair? The gods didn't just give him advantages. They gave him the exact tools needed to bypass every single one of Medusa's defenses. Imagine playing chess, where your opponent gets to remove all your pieces before the game even starts. That's not strategy. That's stacking the deck. Here's the kicker. Perseus wasn't even after Medusa for personal reasons. This wasn't some revenge quest or noble mission. He was doing someone else's homework. The myths say King Polydectes sent him on this suicide mission to get rid of him, figuring he'd never come back. But the gods saw an opportunity. Here's this disposable young man they could use to tie up their Medusa problem. So they turned what should have been a death sentence into an engineered victory. The whole sequence stinks of divine meddling. Perseus happens to meet the Grey-Eye who tell him where to find the nymphs. Those nymphs coincidentally have all the gear he needs. Athena guides his hand during the beheading. At every step, There's a god or goddess making sure things go according to plan. That's not a hero's journey. That's following divine GPS instructions. Ancient artists loved painting this moment, but they always framed it wrong. It's always Perseus looking brave and heroic, never the truth. Him being shepherded through each step like a child on training wheels. The Hood Museum's collection shows Athena right there in the background of these scenes, watching like some celestial stage manager. They knew what was really going on. Perseus wasn't the star of this show, just the puppet. And let's talk about that final moment. Perseus uses the reflection in his god-given shield to sneak up on Medusa while she sleeps. Real heroic stuff there, attacking someone in their sleep with equipment someone else gave you. The reason this scene looks so clean in all the pottery paintings? Because showing the reality would be embarrassing. A scared kid using divine hand-me-downs to murder a traumatized woman in her home doesn't make for great propaganda. The worst part? Perseus didn't even get to keep the head as a trophy. Athena immediately takes it and slaps it on her shield like some macabre bumper sticker. That's all Medusa's life was worth to them. Decoration for divine weaponry. Perseus got used just as much as Medusa did, just in a different way. He was the disposable blade the gods wielded before tossing aside. Modern retellings love playing up Perseus as this great hero, but the original texts tell a different story. Without those divine gifts, he wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes against Medusa. The winged sandals to reach her, the mirrored shield to avoid her gaze, the special pouch to carry the head afterward, even the strategy, attack while she sleeps, probably came from Athena. There's not a single part of this victory that Perseus can honestly claim as his own. The artifacts don't lie. On one vase, Perseus looks almost confused as Athena physically guides his sword arm. Another shows him nervously glancing back at Hermes, like a kid checking if he's doing it right. These aren't depictions of heroism, they're show-and-tell demonstrations of divine manipulation. The gods needed Medusa gone, and Perseus happened to be the nearest patsy. Here's what gets me afterward. Perseus uses Medusa's head as a weapon multiple times, but he's not the one controlling it. The power still belongs to the gods. When he turns Atlas to stone or uses it against his enemies, it's not his skill at work. It's Athena's power wearing Perseus like a glove. That's the recurring theme here. Mortals don't get real agency in these stories. They're just vehicles for divine will. Even the aftermath proves who was really in charge. Perseus eventually gives the head to Athena, who mounts it on her shield like a hunting trophy. The message is clear from start to finish. This was never about Perseus, or even really about Medusa. It was about the gods proving they could shape mortal lives any way they chose. Heroes don't need to be strong or clever when the gods hand them all the answers. The uncomfortable truth is that Perseus was just another victim here, just a different kind. The gods used him as their errand boy, their hitman, their tool. They could have dealt with Medusa themselves if they wanted. But where's the lesson in that? Better to show mere mortals that even their greatest heroes are just pawns in divine games. That's why this story keeps getting told wrong, because the real version shows how little control anyone had. That's the real monster in this tale, not Medusa in her cave, but the system that made her death inevitable. A system where gods play with mortal lives like toys, where justice is just another word for convenience. Perseus didn't defeat Medusa, the gods did. And they made sure everyone would remember it as a hero's triumph rather than what it really was, divine execution by proxy. The artifacts tell the real story if you know how to look. Perseus's nervous glances, Athena's constant presence, the way Medusa's head always ends up back in divine hands. This wasn't a quest. It was a setup from day one. And both of them, Medusa and Perseus, were just playing roles the gods wrote for them long before either was born. That's not mythology. That's rigged reality. The blade came down quick, but the suffering didn't end there. When Perseus took Medusa's head, the snakes kept moving for a while, their bodies twitching even as their fangs went slack. That's the first cruel joke. Her curse outlived her. The Greeks saw something useful in that. They kept the head alive, in a way, turning it into the ultimate weapon. Not even death could free Medusa from being used by others. Athena was first in line to claim the prize. The goddess who'd cursed Medusa now slapped her face right on the front of her shield. The same features that had been twisted in pain during her transformation were now frozen forever in that awful scream. The Parthenon statue showed this perfectly. Athena standing tall while Medusa's head glared from both shield and breastplate. Protection through trauma repurposed. That's the Gorgonean in a nutshell. Ancient soldiers carried her image into battle painted on their shields. Drinkers found her face staring up from the bottom of their wine cups. Temple builders mounted stone versions of her head on rooftops to scare off evil spirits. Everywhere you looked, Medusa was there, not as a person, but as a thing people used. The exhibition nails it with their display of drinking vessels. You'd be halfway through your wine when suddenly those snake-locked eyes peered up at you from the dregs. They turned her into a party trick. There's a particular cruelty to how this played out. The gods didn't just kill Medusa. They commodified her. Perseus used the head like some magical grenade, petrifying enemies left and right. In one engraving from the Metamorphoses, he doesn't even show the actual severed head, just uses its power abstractly to save Andromeda. Cleaner that way. No messy reminder of the violence behind the magic. The artifacts tell the story. Medusa's image everywhere, but Medusa herself erased. Athena's shield is the perfect metaphor for what happened here. The Gorgonian doesn't show Medusa's human face from before the curse. Not the woman who loved flowers and feared snakes. It's the monstrous version. Wrinkles etched deep, eyes completely blank. That's how they wanted her remembered, as the thing they made her into, not the person she'd been. The Hood Museum's engraving of Pallas Athena makes this explicit. Medusa's features are exaggerated into pure horror, every detail designed to make viewers flinch. Even the practical uses underline the injustice. Placing Gorgonea on temple roofs wasn't about honoring Medusa. It was practical witchcraft using her lingering power to protect sacred spaces. The same spaces that failed to protect her became beneficiaries of her tragedy. There's a whiff of guilt in that, if you look close enough. Like they knew the temple should have been safer for women like her, so they plastered her face everywhere as both apology and excuse. The really twisted part? Medusa's image worked. People genuinely believed Gorgonea could ward off evil, so the victim became absorbed into the system that victimized her. Even in death, she served the same gods who'd ruined her life. That colossal Athena statue says it all. 40 feet tall, covered in gold, with Medusa's face right over the goddess's heart. Not as tribute, as armor. Modern museums display these artifacts without always explaining what they mean. The exhibition tries to correct that by showing Gorgonea next to earlier images of Medusa as a normal woman. Contrast is jarring. On one vase, she's brushing her hair. On another, that same hair is snakes. Then comes the parade of shields and roof ornaments, each one further distorting her features until she's barely recognizable. The process of dehumanization, captured in baked clay and carved stone. Perseus didn't just take Medusa's head. He set the template for how history would remember her. Not as a woman wronged, but as a monster slain. The artifacts reinforce this countless paintings of the heroic beheading, almost none of Medusa's earlier life. Even Ovid's version skips right to the action. Who has time for backstory when there's a monster to kill? The Gorgonian's ubiquity proves how thoroughly Medusa was repackaged, from person to monster to household charm. There's a particular drinking vessel in the exhibition that drives this home. It's beautifully painted, clearly expensive, and right at the bottom, where the last sip would reveal it, Medusa's face. The rich drank their wine looking at her suffering. The perfect metaphor for how Greek society consumed her story. This is what happens when myths get reduced to symbols. The messy human truth gets smoothed over until all that's left is a useful image. Not a woman betrayed by gods and murdered by heroes. Just a scary face to put on things. The artifacts don't lie. That looping artistic evolution from human to monster to decoration tells the real story. Medusa never got justice. She got repurposed. Medusa's story isn't just about her, it's about how the Greek gods really operated. Think of it like this. They didn't punish the guilty. They punished whoever was easiest to reach. Poseidon violates Medusa in Athena's temple, and who suffers? Not Poseidon. Medusa. That's the system in action. Spyros nails it when he points out the unfairness. Medusa was mortal. Her sisters, immortal. That's why she was the one who got turned into a monster. The gods didn't mess with her sisters because they couldn't. But Medusa, she was breakable. So they broke her. It wasn't about justice. It was about convenience. This wasn't a one-time thing either. The myths are full of these stories. Take Daphne. Apollo chases her, she begs for help, and what happens? Her father turns her into a tree. Sounds like a rescue, right? Except now she's stuck as bark and leaves forever. The gods saved her by erasing her. Sound familiar? Or Erythea, Boreas, the north wind snatches her up. No punishment for him, just another mortal woman dealing with the aftermath. The pattern's obvious. When gods cause problems, mortals pay the price. The exhibition highlights how Ovid's Metamorphoses is basically a catalogue of these moments. Someone angers a god, they become a deer, a spider, a rock, never the other way around. Athena's actions are especially telling, goddess of wisdom, sure, but also the same one who cursed a rape victim. Soropoulos calls it out bluntly. Real wisdom would have punished Poseidon, not Medusa. But that's not how Olympus worked. Gods didn't hold each other accountable. They held mortals accountable for the gods' mistakes. Here's the thing about divine justice. It wasn't justice at all. It was damage control. Medusa's transformation wasn't about protecting her. It was about protecting Athena's pride. Her temple got violated, so she took it out on the one person who couldn't fight back. That's not wisdom. That's bullying with extra steps. Look at how they treated other mortals too. Arachne brags about her weaving skills. Athena turns her into a spider. Niobe says she's a better mother than Leto. Apollo shoots her kids. The gods didn't teach lessons. They made examples. And the examples were always mortals. That's what makes Medusa's story stand out, though. Most of these myths end with the victim silenced, turned into a tree or a bird or a constellation. But Medusa? They didn't just silence her, they weaponized her, turned her into something people feared, then used that fear to prop up their own power. There's a reason her face ended up on Athena's shield. It wasn't tribute, it was a warning to mortals, a reminder of what happened when you got in the gods' way. The exhibition pieces together how deliberate this was. Every Gorgonian, every image of her screaming face reinforced the same message, step out of line, and this could be you. The really messed up part? It worked. For centuries, people retold Medusa's story like she was the villain. They skipped over Poseidon's crime, skipped over Athena's betrayal, and just focused on the monster at the end. That's how systemic injustice functions. It rewrites history so the abusers look clean. Modern readers spot the hypocrisy instantly. Why didn't Athena go after Poseidon? Why didn't anyone call him out? Because the rules were different for gods. They could do what they wanted, to whoever they wanted, and the only consequences fell on mortals. Medusa's tragedy wasn't random, it was policy. Soropoulos puts it best, divine justice wasn't about fairness. It was about maintaining order, an order where gods stayed powerful and mortals stayed small. Medusa's curse? Just paperwork in their system. One more mortal life altered to suit immortal whims. That's why her story still stings. It's not ancient history, it's a mirror. We still live in worlds where the powerful protect their own and punish the vulnerable, where victims get reshaped into cautionary tales. Medusa wasn't mythology. She was the reality of how power works, then and now. The exhibition's big realization isn't about her at all, really. It's about recognizing the system that let this happen. The same system that turned her into a monster so no one would ask why the gods needed so many monsters in the first place. Medusa's curse wasn't justice. It was the gods admitting they'd rather break a mortal than fix themselves. That's the divine crime scene we've been walking through. Not monsters under the bed, but the hands that put them there. Not Medusa's snakes, but the gods who tied them to her scalp. The real terror isn't her gaze turning men to stone. It's realizing stone's all that's left when gods decide you're expendable. Medusa's face was everywhere in ancient Greece, but not just as a warning. People slapped her image on temple roofs, military shields, even their drinking cups. That's the weird twist no one talks about. The Greeks were terrified of her, but they also believed her face could protect them. It's like keeping a lion as a guard dog. You might get mauled, but at least the thieves will think twice. The Gorgonian, that's the fancy name for Medusa's screaming snake-haired face, was the ancient world's security system. Temple builders stuck them above doorways like supernatural burglar alarms. Soldiers painted them on shields to freak out the enemy. There's something darkly funny about warriors running into battle behind the face of a woman the gods had destroyed. Don't look at her. But also, please stare directly at this shield. The exhibition shows one pottery fragment where a soldier's holding a shield with Medusa glaring front and center, her eyes wide, her mouth open in that eternal scream. The Greeks really went all in on the idea that the best defense was a good nightmare. Athena was the biggest hypocrite of all. After turning Medusa into a monster, she slapped her face right on the front of her divine shield. The massive Athena Parthenos statue had two Gorgonias, one on the shield, one on the breastplate. That's some next-level irony. The goddess who cursed Medusa, then used her image like a cosmic pepper spray. Might turn you to stone, don't test me. The artifacts make it clear this wasn't respect. It was weaponizing trauma for personal gain. But the Gorgonian wasn't just for gods and warriors. Normal people used it too. The exhibition has these little clay roof tiles with her face pressed into them, the kind you'd find on ordinary houses. There's a wine cup with her peering up from the bottom, so you'd be sipping your drink and suddenly, bam, snake eyes staring back. Greeks basically turned Medusa into the ancient equivalent of those beware of dog signs, except the dog was a cursed woman's severed head. Here's where it gets interesting though. People didn't just fear the Gorgonian, they believed in its power. This wasn't just decoration. They thought Medusa's face could actually repel evil spirits. Temples used them like sacred bug zappers, mount them high, let the magic face scare off demons. Same logic as gargoyles on medieval churches, really. The exhibition has a grate side by side, a medieval gargoyle snarling next to a Greek Gorgonian. The expressions are almost identical. Some fears don't change. Medusa's curse became her power in a messed up way. The very thing that made her dangerous, that petrifying gaze, got repurposed as protection. It's like the Greeks thought, if her eyes can turn living people to stone, maybe they can blast ghosts too. There's this one funeral jar with her face painted near the rim, meant to guard the ashes inside. Imagine spending eternity with Medusa as your bouncer. The duality is hard to miss. In stories, Medusa's a monster. In daily life, she's a guardian. The exhibition makes it clear. The Greeks had no problem with the contradiction. They feared her in the caves but invited her onto their rooftops. The same culture that sent heroes to kill her also depended on her image to keep evil away. That's the real twist. They needed the monster they created. There's a practical side too. Gorgonea were cheap to make. Just press a mold into wet clay, boom, instant apotropaic charm. The exhibition's got a whole wall showing how the designs got cruder over time, like a photocopy of a photocopy. Early versions show recognizable human features under the snakes. Later ones, just bug eyes and fangs. Even as her humanity faded from the art, the power stayed. Nobody cared if the face looked real, as long as it scared off the bad vibes. Athena's shield is the ultimate example of this relationship. The Gorgonian didn't show Medusa as she was in life, or even during her cursed existence. It froze her in the moment of maximum terror, mouth stretched wide, eyes bulging. That's what protection looked like to the Greeks, distilled horror, captured and repurposed. The exhibition card puts it bluntly. It's not the monster that protects, it's the fear of the monster. Modern parallels aren't hard to find. We still slap scary faces on things for protection. Hockey masks, horror movie posters, those creepy baby dolls people put on porches to keep solicitors away. The psychology hasn't changed. If something unsettles us, we assume it'll unsettle whatever's lurking in the dark, too. The exhibition even shows a modern security Halloween decoration next to an ancient Gorgonian. Same frown, same wide eyes, 4,000 years apart. The takeaway? Medusa got screwed twice. First by the gods who made her a monster, then by the people who turned her into a tool. But here's the thing. Those Gorgonia worked. Whether through belief, psychology, or actual magic, people felt safer with her face around. That's the tragic irony. The victim became the protector. Not by choice, but because the world needed her fear more than it valued her humanity. Next time you see a Gorgonian in a museum, look closer. That's not just a monster's face. It's a fossilized cry for help, turned into a security system. The Greeks feared Medusa, sure, but they also knew terror could be useful, as long as it was happening to someone else. For centuries, Medusa was the monster in the story. The one hero slew, the face people feared. But today, she's become something else entirely. Modern women don't see a creature to be destroyed. They see a survivor. A woman who endured the worst the gods could throw at her and still came out powerful. That shift in perspective changes everything. Hélène Sixtus spelled it out clearly in The Laugh of Medusa. She didn't just defend Medusa, she celebrated her. Called her beautiful, called her laughing. That's the key difference. Ancient texts describe Medusa screaming. Sixtus hears her laughing. It's a complete flip of the script. The essay argues that Medusa's story reveals more about patriarchal fears than actual monstrosity. If men were so terrified of her gaze, maybe it wasn't because she was dangerous. Maybe it was because she saw too clearly. Artists have picked up on this thread. Harriet Goodhue Hosmer's sculpture of Medusa doesn't show a monster. It shows a woman. The snakes are there, sure, but they're almost decorative. Her face isn't twisted in rage, it's thoughtful, almost sad. This isn't the Medusa of temple carvings, frozen in eternal horror. This is someone you could imagine having a conversation with. The exhibition notes how radical that was for its time. Instead of leaning into the myth's brutality, Hosmer gave Medusa back her humanity. Contemporary artists have taken it further. You'll find Medusa on protest signs now, her face beside slogans about survival and resistance. There's a mural in Brazil that shows her with the words, "A vítima não é culpada." The victim is not guilty. In Greece, activists use her image to confront myths about assault victims. The snakes aren't a curse in these works. They're a crown, a symbol of what she's weathered and survived. This isn't just about reimagining a myth. It's about correcting a history. The ancient versions of Medusa's story focus on her transformation and death. The new ones focus on her life, on what was taken from her. The exhibition, More Than a Monster, makes this explicit. It doesn't start with the Gorgon, it starts with the woman. With the details often skipped over her love for her hair, her fear of snakes, the ordinary moments before the temple. That shift in framing changes how we see everything that comes after. Sixtus wasn't the first to notice how myths punished women for men's actions. But her essay gave language to the idea. She points out how Medusa's monstrosity came from male violence and divine neglect. The same traits used to vilify her, the snakes, the stone gaze, become symbols of resistance in this reading. If her look could turn men to stone, maybe that wasn't a curse. Maybe it was the ultimate defense mechanism. The artifacts in the exhibition show this evolution. Ancient pottery depicts Medusa as a trophy. Modern art shows her as a person. A painting from 2018 has her staring directly at the viewer, calm and unflinching. There's no Perseus in frame, no sword looming over her neck. Just a woman who's survived and who knows her own power. That's the through line in feminist reclaiming. Medusa gets to be the protagonist of her own story for once. There's practical symbolism here too. Women who've experienced assault often connect with Medusa's story. not because they see themselves as monsters, but because they recognize the pattern blame shifting to the victim, power abused without consequence. The snakes become a metaphor for the way trauma lingers. The stone gaze, a reminder that survival can mean building walls. These interpretations aren't in the original myths, but they resonate. That's why Medusa's image endures, not as a warning, but as solidarity. The exhibition's most striking piece might be a side-by-side display. On one side, an ancient Gorgonian, all bulging eyes and twisted mouth. On the other, a modern reinterpretation where Medusa's face is serene, the snakes woven like jewelry, the same face, two completely different stories. The curator's note explains, one is what they made her, the other is what she could have been. This isn't about erasing the myth's darkness, it's about balancing the scales. The ancient world gave us Medusa, the monster. Feminism gives us Medusa, the survivor, the woman who stared down gods and heroes alike, who turned the very things used to break her into sources of strength. That's the version gaining ground now. Not the monster men feared, but the woman they never truly saw. The shift matters, because myths aren't just stories. They shape how we see the world. When Medusa becomes a symbol of empowerment instead of terror, it changes how we talk about victims, survivors, and the systems that fail them. The exhibition's title says it all. More than a monster. That's the point. She always was. It asks you to forget everything you think you know about Medusa. Not the snake hair, not the stone gaze, but the woman underneath. The one who brushed her hair by the river and flinched at garden snakes before the gods got involved. Curated by Elizabeth Hadley in 2023, this show strips away centuries of monster myth to expose the raw human story buried underneath. And it's not pretty. Walk through the exhibit, and the first thing you notice are the contrasts. On one wall, ancient Greek pottery shows Perseus holding Medusa's severed head like a trophy. On the opposite wall, Harriet Goodhue Hosmer's 1854 sculpture gives her back her humanity. No screaming monster, just a tired woman with snakes coiled quietly in her hair. The message is clear. We've been telling this story wrong for a long time. The exhibition doesn't just display artifacts, it stages an intervention. A whole section dissects how Ovid's Metamorphoses handles Medusa's story versus others. Take Daphne turned into a tree to escape Apollo. She gets whole paragraphs of lyrical transformation. Medusa's violation in Athena's temple. 3 lines. The exhibit lays this out visually, projecting Ovid's text on the wall with Medusa's section highlighted in red. It's shockingly brief. Meanwhile, cases display vase paintings of Persephone's abduction and Eo's transformation, scenes that got far more artistic attention than Medusa's trauma. The imbalance is the point. Some victims got sympathy. Medusa got simplified into a monster. The most jarring display pairs 2 artworks. One's a classical Gorgonian, the exaggerated, bug-eyed face you'd see on Athenian shields. Next to it, a 3D reconstruction of what Medusa might have actually looked like, based on descriptions pre-curse. The difference chills you. On the left, a caricature. On the right, someone's daughter. The exhibition forces this comparison over and over. Here's how she was portrayed versus who she might have been. Visitors spend longest at the timeline wall. It starts with Medusa's early life, mortal, vibrant, then hits the temple incident. Here, the exhibit doesn't flinch. It displays temple floor plans marking where the assault likely occurred, alongside quotes from Ovid about Poseidon's actions. Then comes the punishment, Athena's curse illustrated through progressive pottery images, showing Medusa's humanity slipping away. By the timeline's end, she's just a head on a shield. The curators don't announce the injustice. They let the artifacts spell it out. Harriet Goodhue Hosmer's sculpture gets its own nook. Unlike the roaring gorgons of Greek art, this Medusa looks like she's caught mid-thought. Her snakes aren't hissing. They're just there, like bad luck she's learned to live with. The info card explains Hosmer's intent, to show Medusa not as a monster, but as a woman surviving. It's the exhibit's emotional center proof that someone, finally, saw her as more than a cautionary tale. The exhibit's boldest move might be the side-by-side Ovid comparisons. One screen plays animations of Daphne's metamorphosis, leaves sprouting from fingers, bark swallowing cries, while another displays Medusa's truncated scene. The difference in detail, in care, is staggering. Next to these, a touchscreen lets visitors explore how often Medusa's assault gets excluded from modern retellings versus other Ovidian myths. Spoiler, it's left out 4 times as often. Visitors leave notes on a response wall halfway through. Many say the same thing: I never knew. That's the exhibition's real achievement. It doesn't preach. It shows you a classical vase where Medusa's assault is depicted as a tiny scene in the corner, barely noticeable next to Perseus's heroics. Then it asks, why is this the footnote in her own story? The gift shop drives it home. You can buy postcards of classical Gorgon art next to feminist reinterpretations. The contrast follows you out the door. Even the bathroom signs get in on it. Regular stick figures under the words hero, while the women's room has a Medusa silhouette labelled survivor. More than a monster doesn't rewrite history. It exposes how we've been reading it wrong. The most revealing label comes near Hosmer's sculpture. Imagine how many other stories we've simplified to one terrifying moment. That's the takeaway. Medusa wasn't born a monster. She was made into one by gods, by artists, by everyone who found her easier to fear than to understand. The exhibition's final room loops video of modern Medusa reinterpretations, murals, protest art, even a stage play. On the exit door, a mirrored panel forces you to see your reflection alongside her story. The tagline? Who would you be if the world only remembered your worst moment? No answers. Just the question hanging as you step back into a world still full of monsters we've created. Here's what sticks with you afterward. The exhibit never calls Medusa innocent. It doesn't have to. By showing her full humanity, the before, the during, the after, it proves she never needed to be innocent to deserve better. The injustice wasn't just in what happened to her, but in how we've retold it ever since. Gorgonians made her a warning. Hosmer's sculpture made her a person. This exhibit? It makes her impossible to simplify ever again. So yeah, you leave knowing more about Greek art, but you also leave wondering how many other Medusas are out there, real and fictional, waiting for someone to look past the snakes and see the woman. The exhibit doesn't just reframe a myth. It reframes how we look at every story where the victim got rewritten as the villain. And in a world still full of those stories, that might be the most important thing it could have done. Imagine if Medusa could speak after all these centuries of being silenced. What comes out isn't a monster's roar, it's poetry. That's what the Dartmouth exhibition realized when they included Alternus in Mixti Crinibus Angues, a poem that takes its title straight from Ovid's Metamorphoses. Those Latin words mean snakes, mixed in with coiling hair, which sounds almost pretty until you remember they're describing the worst day of someone's life. The poem starts with what everybody forgets, that Medusa was a person before she was a warning sign. It talks about her old fear of snakes, how she'd jump at garden snakes before they lived on her head. There's a cruel joke in that. The things that terrified her most became part of her. The poem asks, what's it like when your greatest fear gets sewn into your skin? The answer's in the next lines, where it describes her trying to sleep with all that hissing. Imagine that. Not just the sound, but knowing they're attached to you. That they'll be there when you wake up. Every morning. Forever. One stanza focuses on her hair, not the snakes, but what came before. Auburn curls she used to brush by the river. The poem makes you see her doing something totally normal, like tucking a strand behind her ear before it hits you. She can't do that anymore. The snakes twist where her fingers used to. That's the real horror Athena cooked up. It wasn't just giving Medusa snakes for hair. It was taking away every small joy she had in being herself. The exhibition paired the poem with a mirror on the wall, not for decoration. So you'd read lines like, I avoid still water now while seeing your own reflection. That's the gut punch. Medusa couldn't look at herself without risking a death sentence. The poem describes her seeing a distorted face in a puddle. Not just monstrous, but unrecognizable. That's the psychological terrorism of her curse. It wasn't enough to make her suffer. She had to watch herself become something she didn't know. When they call me monster, they forget who made me one. That line comes halfway through. It's not angry, it's tired. The poem's Medusa sounds exhausted by the whole thing, by the gods who ruined her, the heroes who hunted her, the artists who turned her pain into decor. There's a whole section where she talks about the Gorgonians, how her screaming face got stamped on shields and roofs, while the real her was stuck in a cave. The poem makes it clear. Medusa knows she's been turned into a brand. The quietest part comes near the end. It describes her sitting in the cave, counting days by the light shifting on the wall. No mention of Perseus coming. No dramatic climax. Just a woman passing time and the only place left to her. That's the exhibition's big insight. The myth focuses so much on her death that it skips over her life. This poem does the opposite. It lingers on how long those years in the dark must have felt. Visually, the exhibition projected the poem's text over Harriet Goodhue, Hosmer's sculpture. Words like, "They gave me fangs but took my voice," floating over Medusa's calm face. That's the dissonance they wanted you to feel. Classical art shows her screaming forever. Hosmer shows her after the scream's worn out. The poem splits the difference. It's not a lament, not a protest, just someone stating facts about what happened to her. You come away with this unsettled feeling. The poem never raises its voice. It doesn't have to. Simple lines like, "I was mortal once," do all the work. There's this one stanza where it lists things she used to do: weave baskets, hum songs, braid her sister's hair, and follows it with, "None of that fits my hands now." That's the tragedy in a nutshell. Not the snakes, not the stone gaze, the way the curse took everything that made her her, and left behind something easier for myths to use. The exhibition didn't stop at the poem. Nearby cases showed ancient writing exercises where kids practiced by copying myths, including Medusa's. Imagine learning to write by scribbling down someone else's trauma. The poem nods to this with, "Even children practice their letters with my story." It's not bitter, just observant. That's what makes it stick. This Medusa isn't raging. She's just tired of being everyone's cautionary tale. Toward the end, the poem circles back to water, to reflections. It describes Medusa finally looking at herself in a pool after years of avoiding it. Not to petrify anyone, just to remember what human eyes look like. But the reflection shows her nothing she recognizes. That's the final twist. The curse didn't just change how others saw her. It changed how she saw herself, and that might have been the cruelest part. The last line doesn't end with a period. It trails off mid-thought, like she got interrupted, or like she's still waiting for someone to actually listen. That's the takeaway. After centuries of being framed as a monster, Medusa's not asking for vengeance, just for someone to hear her side before they reach for the sword. What sticks with you isn't the snakes or the stone, it's how ordinary her grievances are. Wanting to brush her hair without being bitten, wanting to look in the water without fearing what looks back, things any human being would understand. That's the exhibition's real work. Not making Medusa sympathetic, but making her recognizable. Her poem isn't a monster's speech. It's just a woman's voice finally getting through. Here's the thing about Medusa. She was never the monster they made her out to be. That title belongs to the gods who failed her. They took a woman who feared snakes and turned them into her hair. They punished her for something done to her. That's not a myth. That's a pattern. One we still see today. Victims rewritten as villains because it's easier than holding power accountable. Tonight, we listened past the snakes to the woman underneath. So before you go, do one thing. Close your eyes. See her as she was, not as they made her. That's how we break the cycle.